One of the mainstays of the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer musical for 15 years is Gene Kelly. And Gene, Singing in the Rain was your 13th musical motion picture there.
It was.
Yeah, followed An American in Paris. Right? But you weren't just a performer, you also were a creator. And I'd like to know where the idea for Singing in the Rain, that wonderful film, came from.
Well, the idea came from the writers, Comden and Green.
Mm-hmm.
And myself and Stanley Donen, the directors, would like to say that we invented that, but we didn't. All the written material came from Comden and Green, and it wasn't original. And without them, there wouldn't have been a Singing in the Rain. So credit where credit is due, right off.
I don't understand, I never have, and I'm sure a lot of other people don't either. How come, well, you know, when a musical script is written, the musical numbers, who dreams those up?
They come about in many ways. They come about in as many ways as ballets do, as any kind of idea that's pulled out of the air. The way a writer writes a story, they can, in particular musicals, especially this one, you will find that sometimes the numbers will come out of the songs. The songs sometimes are written for the musical in which they're done. In this case, and you're still thinking about Singing the Rain again.
I am, yes.
These songs were from the catalog of Arthur Freed and Horatio Herb Brown, and they weren't written for a specific musical comedy. And we took their catalog and placed them where they were. Now, Singing in the Rain itself, I was asked by the producer, Mr. Freed, what I would do to this number. And naturally, it was a favorite of his, being the author of it. And he and Mr. Brown were anxious to know what would happen to it. And I said, well, it's going to be raining, and I'm going to be singing. And it was one of those cases where the number wasn't very hard to conceive. Really.
But it's very difficult to do. To photograph rain is very difficult.
Yes, that was the hardest thing about it. It's a simple dance, and it wasn't difficult for the dancer, in this case myself, to do it. But it was very hard for Hal Ross, the photographer, to photograph. And he did a magnificent job. The musicians who did the arrangement, and Roger Edens, who thought up that little vamp to go on the beginning, all deserve great credit. And of course, most of the credit goes to Mr. Freed and Mr. Brown, who composed the song to begin with.
A pretty good song, right?
It is a very good song.
Was it a problem? Because when you first came to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, you didn't really come as a musical performer, did you?
I did, but I was loaned by David O. Selznick, who claimed I wasn't a musical performer. And he wanted me to just be an actor. When I say just be an actor, that sounds like I'm putting your confraternity down. I'm not.
No, it seems peculiar after the
No, MGM did borrow me to do a role opposite Judy Garland. That's the first thing I did in pictures. And then later they bought my contract. You know, we were bought and sold. You remember those days,
yes.
like the baseball players and football players used to be. And so they bought me, an indentured servant of Selznick's, now became an indentured servant of MGM. And I did, after Me and My Gal, that musical with Judy, I did 2 straight pictures. Then I did another musical.
To Barry.
Yes.
Now, was it a problem to convince them that you really should be in musicals?
No, I didn't really believe I was going to stay in Hollywood. I never thought I had a motion picture career. I had in my contract I could go back to the stage.
You didn't think? You didn't?
No. I thought motion pictures you had to look like Gable or Gary Cooper or someone, and I never thought of myself as a motion picture actor. Well, and the musical sort of opened that up for me.
Well, now then, to get the opportunity to direct, how did that come about?
Well, I fastened on that because one time I saw a dance that I did in one of the early musicals, and I saw it cut together. And they were cutting away to a lovely lady and who was just watching me. And of course, it ruined the dance. So I said, you better direct your own numbers and or do them with friends and who understand that. So that's really how I started to say, well, and then I got interested. And then it became my life. I really wanted to do nothing else.
So when you would do a musical number, in your mind you would plan out how it would be cut, right?
Yes, you have to do that anyway, but the old-fashioned way of doing it, and that still was retained quite a few years after I got to MGM, was to make a song or dance part of the story. Now for the singer, that's very good because he can be singing I love you, and they can cut away and you still hear I love you, then they can cut back. But when you cut away from a dancer dancing, it's like cutting away from oh what a rogue, and you know, and you don't hear the image, you don't hear the verbs. Right. And you just can't do it. So a dance has to be a complete whole, or shouldn't buy its way in. If it's an incidental dance, if you're in a nightclub and there's a dance team up there that are not in the story, fine. But if the dance has something to do with the story, which it should, by the way, but not always does. It's not always possible to. Often it's in there as an entertainment. At any rate, I made up my mind I had to shoot my own numbers. And actually, the people were at MGM were delighted. They were delighted. And when I went down to Columbia, Harry Cohn was delighted because they hated to do it. And they didn't quite know what to do with them anyway. And they admitted it. They were very frank. They said, oh, yes, take it away.
Oh, well, that's
yes.
wonderful.
And it was not a big deal.
Now, Donald O'Connor's number in Singing in the
That's
Rain.
my favorite.
It's just wonderful. Now, how did that evolve?
Well, that was like Topsy. It just grew. Donald used to... see, every musical performer to begin with, let's say a Donald O'Connor is hired by MGM at the request of Stanley Donen and myself, of course, to be in this particular picture of which we're speaking. And Donald O'Connor has to have an obligatory number with myself, with Debbie Reynolds, by himself. There's an obligation that the audience demands. No, you don't demand. The audience always demands that the performer perform. In this case, Donald was a you know, big-time dancer, and a very comedic one. Well, we still hadn't decided what he would do in the picture, but at every rehearsal, he'd break us all up. We could hardly work. He'd pick up a prop, or he'd pick up a thing like that dummy that we finally used, and he'd do 20 minutes on it, and we'd laugh and laugh. So the next day, we'd say, oh, do that for so-and-so. Somebody came down the set. He'd say, what? We'd say that thing, so he'd do it differently. He was a great improvisateur. He made up everything on the spot, but he never did it twice the same way. So I talked with him and said, could we get that down on beats?